Thanks for tuning in to this episode of I Have Something to Say, where subject matter experts are unafraid and unapologetic about sharing their perspectives regarding issues that impact our lives. They speak up because basically they give a shit. So if you're tired of canned answers and want to finally hear real people cut through the BS and talk about real issues, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Sami Heyman Marrero from Urbender, and behind our mixer is our producer, Chris Majoka from UdoU. Hello, everyone, and welcome. And I am so excited because I've been waiting for the right time to invite my friend, Dr. Charlene Brown, to the show. And welcome, Charlie. I'm so excited to see you.
Thank you so much, Sami. It is really my distinct honor and great pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh my God, I can't even wait to bite our teeth into this topic. But first, I'm just so moved, right, by the direction that your work has taken, because instead of being like all academia and theory, you've really moved into people, right? And really digging deep. And your preparation or academic preparation has been in transpersonal psychology, integral and transpersonal psychology, women's spirituality. That's like your sweet spot right there, right? Also business. You have a lot of business acumen under your belt too. And and just creative expression and humanity is really, I think, what I understand is your wheelhouse. But you really, I just wanted you to come and join us to give us an inside look into your world, into the work that you do, and just explain a little bit more about what transpersonal psychology is and how did you land in this space?
I'll start with the second question because that leads nicely into the first question.
Okay.
I landed by accident. I found my graduate school in the back of a magazine, which I don't necessarily recommend. But I found it in, I don't know, like a natural something magazine. And it seemed interesting. And I looked at the website when I got home and it felt like home. So I said, okay, I packed my stuff up. I bought a car 2 weeks before I left, my first car. And then I drove all the way across the country by myself with my full car and landed in San Francisco for my school. And the transpersonal then is the connection between mind, body, spirit, and environment. And the integral part is integrating that. So integrating the whole of a person, mind, body, spirit, and environment. And I kind of sometimes call myself an accidental psychologist. It wasn't necessarily what I was planning to do or how I was planning to show up in the world. And yet here I am.
Yes. And so, okay, so what were your plans or your vision for yourself prior to bumping into this magazine ad, right? That then completely flip-flopped the trajectory that you had up until then.
Yes. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be in charge. I didn't quite know what that was going to look like, but I wanted to be the one directing people and moving people about. So I went into very practical business for undergrad and got a very good, solid business school education from one of the top business schools in the country. And the only thing I knew with certainty was that I couldn't go directly into corporate America when I graduated. So I took a few years off. People who loved me let me be in denial because I said when I graduated undergrad that I was never going back to school. And people just said, okay, if you say so. Everyone knew it was a lie, probably including me, because I love to learn. I love the process of learning in and of itself. So a few years had passed. I did finally determine I was going back to graduate school and decided if I was going to go, I wanted to go all the way. I don't want to have to go back to school again. Right. So I decided to do a master's and a doctorate back to back. And I decided that I wanted to become an expert in the teen girl. At the time, or shortly before I decided to go to grad school, I had been working at a community center, which really transformed my trajectory with the experience. It's intense. Working in a community center is always very fast paced.
Yeah.
And this is a very beloved community center. So everything was everywhere all of the time.
Mm.
And at one point in a scheduling snafu, I separated my boys from my girls because that was the way that would give me the least amount of pushback. And I said, let me figure this out because I had some, couldn't do it by grade because there were best friend pairs that were in different grades, that I would have separated them out. So I did it by gender, and wow, these girls really, really needed a trusted adult outside of their home to talk to about any and everything. It was also very fulfilling for me. So then in going to grad school and moving in the direction of graduate school, I wanted to become an expert in the teen girl. Because I love learning, I have always done pretty well in school in kind of scholastic pursuits. So college wasn't that difficult for me because I went to college preparatory high school. And I said, I want to become an expert in the teen girl. What does that look like? And in my head, I had brought it down to finding somewhere that had a youth and adolescent studies something and a women's studies something. Women's studies is a lot easier to find, but most of the programs in the United States, overseas wasn't out of the question, but I needed it to be taught in English. So that, of course, where I could go. Most of the women's studies programs in the United States are focused on like strong militant lesbian and or feminism or urban studies. And I said, I don't really want any of those. And so this the magazine, Enter the Magazine, but this very interesting sounding something that I had never heard of either. And I went and someone asked me a good question. They said, is it accredited? And is it accredited by people in suits? I said, those are both very valid questions. The answer was yes, it was accredited. So I embarked on this journey because college wasn't really a challenge for me. My challenge to really be fully present with it, I wanted to have the number one GPA and I wanted to be the first in my class, like have the highest GPA I could possibly have. I went to a school with no grades and therefore no ranking. And still got what I came for. It still very much challenged me in ways I had never been challenged before. And so this integration, this integrative piece of how do we put ourselves together with these various pieces was very intriguing to me. And I think it's an excellent model for studying teen girls, for studying people who are not usually studied outside of any particular lens. For me, Black girls are that's my joy. And most of the academic literature on Black girls focuses on sexuality or adultifying. It has a very negative slant. Now,
and very fair, narrow. It's very narrow-minded too, and based on a lot of assumptions also, right?
Yes. And assumptions that really aren't true for the vast majority of Black girls. So opening that scope. So in graduate school, I didn't know what I was doing there either. And as I moved through and matriculated through, I figured out that my piece was bringing the transpersonal to Black people and women, including Black women and girls. And so that's kind of the piece that I carry forward and figuring out what does this look like in the real world.
Yes, and what does it look like in the real world? How I want to feel it, smell it, hear it, see it, right? So describe that to me. What the results of your approach, to empowering and to guiding and to supporting and listening, because I know you're a good listener too. I've been on the dumping end of it. Thank you for that. So what does that look like in the audiences, right? That you want to impact.
It looks like a lot of things, actually. I consider myself a transpersonal educator, so a holistic educator, but I was doing that before it had a name for me. I was doing this experiential learning feedback I've always gotten from various levels of students. I've been an educator for almost 25 years at this point. So the feedback, and I believe in feedback. The feedback I've gotten from my students, essentially when I develop my own curriculum, when I say, if they need to learn this, let me figure out how to teach it to them. They're like, this was the best. No one has ever taught us this thing before. Thank you for teaching that. Thank you is maybe an overstatement from teenagers. But it is based on the idea that I'm interested in a lot of things. And so I want the various groups I may touch on to be reflected in those interests. So some of that looks like consulting, some of that looks like teaching, some of that looks like coaching, both group and individual. Also doing something called sacred narrative mirroring, which is taking some of my gifts of being fully present, reflecting back to people in a safe way, and writing, and combining them into one specific offering. So that sacred narrative mirroring is a deep conversation that I then reflect back to you verbally and then in writing. Usually the writing triggers all sorts of other information that comes through. And people find that a very sacred space. I find it a sacred space, and that seems to be mirrored with the people who receive it as well.
That I think that's fantastic. And now being on the receiving end of that, I can attest to that your power of listening, and I don't want to say digesting, but it's more like processing, right? Everything from communication to vibe or energy or whatever you want to call it. It's like you really collect it all, and then when you send it right back, that mirror, it's like hits you like a brick on the forehead, quite frankly, but in a good way. But I'm not saying, it's not painful. It's just like, holy shit, what just happened, right? Yeah. So it's very, very powerful. And so is that linked? So is that why does that fall into this? I love it. This title or this role description, right, of spiritual midwife. Is that part of that?
It is part of it, but it's not the whole part.
Okay.
People don't find me by accident. I don't really believe in accidents for the most part. I think things are kind of orchestrated at a higher level or at a deeper level, which are the same thing, really. So people often find me. It's mostly women, but women is, who I serve. People often find me at a point where they are confused. They think they're going crazy. They might be hearing voices. They might be seeing things. They might be having these vibes that they can't explain. So that's called a spiritual awakening. And so what I provide is a safe space to hear that, to receive that. B, here's what this is called. C, here are some resources that I can direct you towards that may make sense to you in that way. So I often meet people at this point where they think they're going crazy. And
Okay.
women in particular, we've been persecuted throughout history for, you might say, bruja, right?
Yeah,
Spanish.
bruja. Yes.
And so in various cultures, we've been persecuted for being the medicine women, for being the spirit walkers, for being the two-spirited people, for being the shamans. All of those things are related, right? Those are different names for slightly different things depending on the culture, of course. And so offering that to people to say, hey, you're not crazy. This thing that you're experiencing has a name, and here are some resources. Because I am so naturally curious and interested in so many things, I've been learning about that and studying about energy and chakras and the way things move and integrate and those vibes. I've been
Yeah.
studying that on purpose for 20 years at this point.
Yeah.
And so before there was this wave of let's talk about wellness and self-care, I was learning the names of things that are related to wellness and self-care.
Right. And that have to do with the core, right? Like people and their emotions and their feelings and their psyches and just like all of those components. Do you feel that women are more intuitive or more fall into this notion or this sense of loss or identity questioning and all of this stuff, because of not only the persecution but maybe other factors, like maybe all of the responsibilities they have to take on. I don't know. It's more of a question there than a statement, because I'm curious. I feel like women might experience or are more in tune, right, with this aspect, of the being, than men, or am I wrong?
Both, actually.
Okay.
I think so. Intuition, in and of itself, everyone possesses it. It is like a muscle. The more you use it, the more you trust it, the stronger it gets.
Mm,
And women are projected that we're more in tune with our intuition. Part of that comes from women still being primary caretakers of children,
mm-hmm.
and you know your child. Most attentive mothers, and there are reasons why mothers cannot be attentive, but
Right.
attentive mothers, they know their child. You know when your child's having a bad day. If something went wrong at school and you haven't yet heard about it, something in you was like, let me check on my baby.
Mm-hmm.
So that connection comes from the womb, right? You've spent 9 months creating and housing this child. There is going
Yeah.
to be a connection there. And so that's why that sort of thing comes more naturally for many women than it does for men. Also, societal roles, men are not allowed to be intuitive.
Mm,
And those who are more successful than women, because we still live in this patriarchal society where we value men and their contributions, even though behind or underneath or whatever every man, not underneath in a sexual sense, but underneath the hierarchy of a man is legions of women who are
mm-hmm.
doing the legwork, who have
Right.
always been doing the legwork.
Right.
So yes, and then the yes part of that is women have been dampened and toned down and turned down and oppressed and suppressed and all of these other things for centuries, and the women are roaring. So women are having we're having our moment in the sun. Men
Mm.
got us to this place on earth, and women will get us out of it.
Oh, okay. that that was like a drop the mic moment right now. Okay, good. And I'm
Funny
looking.
story about dropping the mic. I
Go
was
ahead.
doing that before that was a thing too. There was an
Really?
yes, there was an experience in college. I wrote poetry when I was in college, and everybody seemed to know this but me, that I had entered into an MC battle, like a rap competition, and it was stated as spoken word, and I said, okay, I'll write my spoken word thing. I made it to the last round, which was a battle round, and in my head, I'm like, what am I going to say? And event like the other guy went first. We had classes together. He had to look me in the eye in our class. We had the same major. And I got the mic and I was like, listen, in front of the entire student body, athletes included, rowdy athletes included. I said, listen, I've come in peace. I don't have anything to say. Literally put the microphone down and walked off the stage.
So you're also not a pacifist. I don't know if that's the right word because of the
I'm
language barrier. No, no.
I'm not a pacifist. I will
I,
defend myself when necessary. I work at that community center. I work with two guys who
I,
they would constantly give me scenarios and they're like, "What would you do?" And my response would be, "I am not a pacifist."
okay,
And that's
great,
it,
good.
because I'm not going to detail what
Yeah,
I
good.
could do. Where I think we're all capable of protecting ourselves
Oh,
when the time comes necessary.
absolutely. Well, I'm glad that we clarified that,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
just in case, I will
Yes,
defend myself if I needed to.
exactly.
Yes,
Exactly. Good. No, because that's part of the whole too, right? Is to
it
know
is.
to tap into that also, right?
No, no.
No?
It's a good thing that I don't have to tap into that.
Okay,
I
good.
am grateful that my energy is pretty peaceful. So what
Yeah.
I get reflected back to me is generally peaceful. These
Yeah.
crazy things we see online, I'm never a part of them.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't think to take my camera out anyway if I was a part of them, but I'm never a part of them. And I'm very grateful for that. I
Well,
think we're all capable. You turn the right things off, and I think we're all capable of extraordinarily dark, violent things if we had
yeah.
to be.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful that those are not turned off in me, and that light and brightness and sunshine is turned on for the most
That's
part.
awesome. That's great. And so and like you said before, that's something you have to exercise, right? You know what? It's so funny that you mentioned that because I just had a conversation before we started recording this with someone that's in another market in Miami, and he just called me and he told me, oh, your work precedes you, whatever. And I'm like, really, whatever. So then we started talking, and he told me, have you spoken to so and so, right? Because I feel like you too would be able to bring forth this thing. And I said, well, yes, I've reached out to her so many times, but she doesn't, I don't know, she doesn't want to engage, and that's okay. He says, oh, but you have to. And so then, me and how I'm animate when I think he misinterpreted that I kind of don't want to deal with this person. And I said, no, 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 wait a second. I agree with you. She's awesome. She's very, she shows up, in her full power and all of this stuff. Is that for some reason every time I've reached out, we just haven't, like, she has been unresponsive, and I don't know why. And that's okay. I know that eventually it'll happen. So I told him I totally agree with you, right? In that we can't, that there's a time and a place, and that I don't want to come across as being antagonistic. On the contrary, right? But it was good that he mentioned that, because I told him when she approaches, because it's bound to happen, we live in a very tight knit community, I'll be the first to say, hey, yes, I'm glad we're finally doing this, right? And so then, yeah, it's I think is it part of this growth process, right? To be able to know when to just step back, and let things unfold, and then just be open to when, like, how important is it for business? Because this is a business thing, right? That I'm talking about, to work on the vibes, or work on, like, the transpersonal, right, psychology behind relationships and dynamics, and just being. How important is it?
I think it's very important, and there's an aspect of both and. So I think that things are as I said, orchestrated. I might call that divine timing.
Yeah.
That sometimes things just don't quite fit for a reason you don't understand, and then they either don't fit at all, or they fit so amazingly in ways you couldn't have foreseen
Yeah.
prior to this moment where everything just clicks and is just right. Also, this concept of both and, pardon me, where two seemingly paradoxical things can and do exist side by side.
Mm,
She is both amazing, and it hasn't quite clicked for you to work with her just yet.
right. Yeah.
And we really like either or in United States society. We really like hard dichotomies, even though nothing is honestly a hard dichotomy.
Yes.
So really embracing this idea that both of these things are true, even
Mm,
if they seem paradoxical, perhaps especially if they seem paradoxical, that they both can and do exist everywhere. You can see both and everywhere you look once you're looking for it. So the idea of energy in a business is simply an extension of the energy of the people who make up that business. If people are You sow a lot of seeds, Sammy, and in the sowing of seeds, not all of them bear fruit. This one hasn't bore fruit yet, but
mhm.
so many of them do that you have a well-connected and well-respected position within the Florida generally, within the entire state of Florida, and the businesses there, especially the Latino businesses there. So that sowing the seeds, people wouldn't keep coming back to you if they didn't enjoy working with you, if you weren't walking your talk in the way that you do. So all of that is the extension of who you are as a person. So your business is going to run that way, certainly. And that's true for all people. I believe that we get the world that is reflected back to us is the reflection of our deepest beliefs about ourselves. If I hate myself, I will find myself in situations that hate me back.
Wow.
And so people are not, I don't think that enough people understand that how they believe about themselves or what they believe about themselves, that shows up and reinforces itself over and over again. And so shifting your thinking can literally change your life.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. So there's a lot of self-reflection in this process, right? And also not I think a big thing is also not having a chip on your shoulder, right? And being open to just take constructive criticism. I've been trying to do that a lot, more. I feel like in the last year especially, because with these Zoom calls and everything, it's like it creates like a barrier, and I feel like people are a little bit more blunt and open, which I honestly appreciate, right? But do you find that, how do you see this whole technology, and these interactions, right, between human beings, through this, right, through like we're doing right now, either affecting in a positive way, or is it an end and or thing too, like
Both
you just
and, yes.
said. Yeah, it's both in, yeah.
I think it's both and also. There's great capital in technology. Technology has single-handedly changed the world in 20 years.
Yeah.
We couldn't, even when we had cell phones in the 90s, we couldn't imagine this.
Yeah.
The cell phones used to, you have to press one button, and then now we have text message. So they made, they made keyboards for your phone to have
Yeah.
a text message conversation in a way that you might do in, via an email. And at the same time, younger people in particular are, they view their social media platforms as, in the same way that you and I might view our arm or our hand, it's a literal extension of themselves. And so my concern is that we also know that technology, these screens are highly addictive, and as addictive as opioids, in fact. And younger people don't have a core of themselves inside themselves anymore. So with technology as addictive as opioids, so a generation of addicts, basically. We don't call it that because we like technology. But the effects are very, very similar. And you can see young people, if you take their phone away, they go through symptoms of withdrawal.
Oh,
They're
yeah, it's
lighter
horrible.
than an actual opioid, and you can get through them a little bit quicker. But it changes our nervous system to be around so much technology all the time. It literally has an effect on the electromagnetic things that make our heart beat, for instance. So it's a both and. It's amazing from many cases a medical perspective. Instead of having to gut somebody open, it's a little tiny incision with a little mic, with a camera and like
Yes.
a laser sort of thing. And that's amazing. But I think I think a next step is going to be to try and microchip people, because we're close, right? We have medical devices that already go underneath the skin, that are already implanted, and in the name of saving your relative, saving your loved one, I think it's a very short step from one to the next to say, hey, we're going to try and microchip people on a more on a broader basis, which is a bit ominous. So that's where the technology takes its turn, right?
Yeah.
Do we want to be microchipped by the government? I can't speak for other people. And historically, a Black person in America, I do not have a trust built up of the government that they are going to have my best interest at heart And even if they pretend to have my best interest at heart, that they're actually going to honor their word. I do not have that faith in the United States government.
Uh-huh.
So technology is both. It is a wonderful, literally life-saving thing, and at the same time we still have to figure out who we are at our core inside of ourselves, and I think that's what we've been faced with. So the last year and a half, 2 years that it's almost been, people had to really face themselves in a way that they never had before. All of their distractors were taken away, and they had to look at themselves in the mirror, metaphorically naked, to say,
Yes.
who is this person that I've been running from for all of this time?
Wow.
And I think that people are losing their minds, or they feel like they're losing their minds because they've never had to face themselves in this way before. And coping mechanisms, they kind of stack one on the next, on the next, on the next. And you don't realize how armored you are until you have to face yourself metaphorically naked and say, oh, that's a coping mechanism. That's a coping mechanism. That one too. This thing over here, this diving into work, this always doing my side hustle or my 7 side hustles. That's me. I'm talking to me. When I left Philadelphia to go to graduate school, I had 7 actual jobs, and I've been recovering, and then it's back up. It goes up and down, and I've been doing the entrepreneur life for
Yes.
more than 10 years.
Yes.
But people having to face themselves feels like an identity crisis. And in that identity crisis, the question comes, and I think this is particularly more for women who have had that suppression and oppression and being devalued and all of those things, to say, who am I? And to be afraid that you don't have an answer in the moment when you ask that question. When you get to the point of asking it, it's terrifying to not have an answer, because perhaps you identified with all of the things that you do rather than who you actually are. You may not even like all of the things that you do. And so being faced with this kind of great reconciliation of who am I and how do I want to show up in the world? How do I want to move into and through this world around me? Also keeping in mind that the world we experience is our deepest belief about ourselves, reflected back to us. So that's a lot. That's really heavy for most people.
Yes, definitely. And so understanding this, these relationships and how to navigate, right? Energy and vibes and dynamics and all of that. Like how does the transpersonal um and the integration of all of this also help maybe how do you say, not the escalate, but I want to say more like not even prevent, I want to say like lessen, the tensions and the aggressions and violence that people are experiencing by just having opposing views, for example, on so many levels. I mean, just everything at this point is like up for discussion and like debate and argument, right? And also is the lack of, or maybe the finding, right, of like, who the hell am I, right? And because I see that there's a lot more aggression even when people are starting to come out now after being away. It's almost like you see people being so nasty, even violent with one another for no apparent reason, right? And so I got to tell you, for example, and this is an example. So both my kids did like online learning for a whole year, okay? And they're like 6 weeks into, right, brick and mortar with all the precautions and everything, right? And they both are now lobbying, okay, since late last week, on going back to full time. They want to go back to full time online school after they had wanted to go back, right? And so then I'm like, why? And they're like, we've noticed, number one, that people are, what did they say? People are annoying. He says that other kids, people are just annoying, and we waste a lot of time. It's like, just getting from one place to another. The teachers spend half the time just reprimanding and all of that. And I just want to do the work. It's like I can't hear, what they're teaching. So I'd rather go back. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, are we like actually discussing this? Right. And so then, and also they're finding that people are, mean, right? Like, there's after being removed from it, they're like, well, that's not cool, right? That's just not cool. And so anyway, so is that, how do we get out of this? How do we get out of this situation? And I don't even know what to do. I'm like, should I pull them out? Like, I'm in that crossroads right now because it's like socialization. You hear all of these things, right? That I'm guessing has to do with, allowing them to coexist with different opinions. And that's part of just being human. But so then how does this work? Does this help the transpersonal, right? And the integration and this, this work that you do in trying to alleviate, right? Or reduce these tensions between, polarizing views, or to at least deal with it.
Yes. So big question you asked. I don't have an answer to how do we get out of this at the very broad level. But what I do know is that when you sit with yourself, you have a lot less time for other people, and lashing out at other people is a detour from sitting with yourself and your difficult feelings and all of these emotions that we don't even we haven't even been allowed to name, not to mention sit through and work our way through them. There was a year, it was like a year and a half, I think, where I was just owning my rage. I wasn't harming myself. I wasn't harming other people. I was funneling that into, I was ripping things. I needed the tactile destruction of something. And underneath the rage, first of all, when people asked how I was doing, I said, I am enraged and it is glorious. And underneath the rage was sadness, was feelings of abandonment, was grief, a lot of grief, and rage for other people that weren't on the thing I thought I was rageful about. And so I think this layering of feelings is a lot of what our children are feeling. And African American women, Black women are like, I don't want to go back into the office where all these microaggressions happen all the time.
Yeah.
So having had a year and a half to just be in our own energy,
Yeah.
while that doesn't necessarily feel great when some of the energies are heavier and denser and more difficult to experience and go through, it's taken away the element of microaggressions at a very large scale. I would bet that the same children who may be problematic now in your kids' classrooms, they were like that before. They just time away, it amplifies it when you come back to it. Say, oh, this is way bigger than I remembered it. Drivers on the road are very aggressive also.
Oh, yes, too. Yes.
And everybody thinks that it is, that is me, that mine is the rightest thing that could be. And we've had a year and a half without having people push back on that. So it made it more extreme.
Yeah.
Sitting with yourself and really feeling your feelings it sounds like a simplistic answer. It's not. The words are simple. It's not an easy task. Because we don't have the tools. We've never been taught to do that. And I find that the transpersonal really, really helps with that on purpose. I focus a lot of my information is on understanding how this feels or where this shows up in your body, because it's all connected. Because your anger shows up in your body somewhere. And it's definitive. It's probably the same place until you address that place. It might be telling you that your kidney is inflamed. It might be telling you that you need to go get your heart checked out. Hip pain has to do with moving forward in life. Arm pain, arm things, arm issues have to do with how you're embracing life. And I bet you 99 times out of about 100 that people with arm things have had a time dealing with something, holding on to something, grasping something. People with worry, people that don't digest things well, they're worry warts. They don't digest ideas well in addition to food. That shows up in your GI tract. So understanding that these things are related, that people's aggression itself is likely misplaced, but what else are you angry about? And what else are you sad about? We have valued some emotions over other, the happy, positive emotions. Nobody, women for a long time, we're just now starting to be allowed to be angry at all.
Yeah.
In the Black community, we're
Yeah.
labeled angry Black women. In the Latina community, it might be a fiery Latina.
Uh-huh.
And so there's all these stereotypes and tropes that we have to navigate through as well, while also trying to figure out this layering of our own emotions. And for many men, sadness is not allowed. They're not allowed to have and hold grief. So there's a sense of loss. I think many people have not faced the sense of loss that the last 18 months have brought us, that we're really feeling grief. There's a lot of grief to go around. I also sometimes do grief ceremonies as well, to just kind of help people facilitate some of that grief, and on purpose, to sit with it and move through it on purpose. And children certainly aren't taught that in many ways, because their parents, their adults, are not taught that as well. And so
Yeah.
children are still very much sponges of their environments, so they're mirroring the angry adults in their lives for the most
Right.
part, I would guess.
Wow. And so the cycle, it's like either the cycle continues, and then how do you break it, right? And so this is just a lot of work to do. Listen, any takeaways that you could share with us, right? Like where do you even, start, in the sense of just analyzing or evaluating where you're at in terms of wanting to, because some people are just not ready for it, right? And that's okay too. So then how, when do you know that, wait a second, I need help, wait a second, I think I'm ready for, experience to experience some kind of support that will take me down a path that I don't know what it is. It might freak me out. It might be scary, but I should consider it. Like, what does that look like? In when people call you, and I know you said that, when they think they're going crazy. So, what are some of the things that they say? Right, is going on that qualifies them, or makes them think that they're crazy, that defines crazy, right?
Often they're being visited by their dead loved ones. They're like, my grandmother keeps coming to me in my dream, and she's right next to me. And it's like, yes, she is. So it's giving themselves permission to do that. I would say, if you are thinking about this, like, if this keeps coming into your head this time, it's probably well past time. Again, we're afraid to feel our feelings, but something you can do in the moment. If you can, you want to do this with me, maybe, Sammy. If
Uh-huh.
you put your fingertips with some pressure on your cheekbones, and then just take 3 deep breaths. Twice more. Slow, purposeful breaths. One more. That calms your entire body down, your whole system, your whole energy went down. You're much calmer than you were 15 seconds ago. Um,
Definitely.
so
Yeah.
stopping to breathe on purpose, and
Yeah.
I'm going to take 3 deep breaths. I'm going to take 1 deep breath if you can manage one. It Breath activates all sorts of things, all sorts of helpful things in our bodies, our physical bodies. So that would help, honestly. Just taking 3 deep breaths once a day. More times a day will help even more, but just once a day, on purpose, in purpose, will help our nervous systems not be so afraid and not have to be in fight and flight all the time, because a lot of these reactions that we're seeing are being in fight mode without knowing how to calm ourselves down out of fight mode. This is, for many people, this is all they've ever known, is to fight and yell at people, when there are far more effective ways to deal with some of the conflicts that we may experience in our day to day.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Charlie, for sharing all of this insight, and just like a different, I just feel it's like a whole different outlook and perspective on how to navigate life. And I really appreciate it. I've been dying to have you, And so I think this is just one of many other conversations that we'll have on and offline. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sammy, for having me. This is always my pleasure. This is fun for me to have these sorts of conversations with amazing women like yourself, just by the way, who are really centered in yourself and walking your talk and doing your work. So I really appreciate you as a woman, as an amazing Latina who is doing her thing in her community, and for having me on your podcast.
I love you. Thank you so much. And I'll be talking to you soon, okay?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Un beso. Bye-bye.
This concludes this episode of I Have Something to Say. We want to thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to tell your friends about us. We're on Spotify and iTunes as well. There's more to come next week. And remember, if you have something to say, it's time to speak up.